Hi. So I've been fortunate to attend TED a few times, and got my first slide. Last year, when I attended TED, I met a friend of mine. Can I have my first slide? Technologically challenged. There we go. So when I met at TED last year, I met Phyllis, and we actually had met before online. Not how you're thinking we met. We were introduced by Linda Avey, who co-founded 23andMe, one of the first online genetics testing companies. And she, because we shared our genetic information with Linda, saw that the two of us shared the same genetic information in our mitochondria, called our mitochondrial DNA. That's with Harriet. And so we were distantly related, at least on the mother side. And using that information, we could look back at our genetic history. It turned out that we were also related to Ozzy the Iceman, so Harriet, Ozzy, and me. And given that we were in the 21st century, I think, of course, we started our own Facebook group for our haplotype. You're all welcome to join. And Harriet made us happy haplotype T-shirts, which she also ordered online. So why am I telling you this story, and what does this have to do with the future of medicine? Well, I think these are small examples of how exponential technologies are starting to affect us across our spectrum, most specifically in health and wellness, from cheaper gene analysis to computational bioinformatics to internet connectivity and social networking that enabled Harriet and I to meet. Now, on the TED stage last year as well, Ray Kurzweil spoke. And Ray is a famed futurist, inventor, the author of The Singularity is Near. And Ray talks about the real power of exponential technologies, that things are actually expanding much more quickly than we usually think about in our linear minds, and especially in terms of information technology, computer speed. The power of what we have in our pocket, if you think about it, is really quite remarkable. So remember this guy. What we can do now with this little magic piece of technology, just think about what this might be able to do in 10 more years. So while my day job is at Stanford as a physician and scientist, I was lucky last summer to lead the medicine track at a new institution called Singularity University. There's several staff and students here. And Singularity University's mission it was co-founded by Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis from the X Prize, is to look at these interesting exponential technologies from medicine to nanotech to biotechnology and see where they're going. And this gave me an opportunity to look across the spectrum of healthcare and wellness and take a look at where exponential technologies are moving. And of course, this all happens within the very complex ecosystem of healthcare, which we don't have time to summarize, except to say that there's nature and there's nurture, there's patient, there's healthcare provider, there's wellness, and it's all underneath one roof, but very interconnected. So let's look now at some exponential technologies and how they're going to affect medicine today and into the future. So number one, faster. Now, you all know that computers are getting faster and faster. They're approaching the speed of the human brain, or are going to surpass it pretty soon. I think this is a picture of a Berkeley student trying to catch up with a Stanford student.
Oh, man!
And what this exponential technology, particularly in computer speed, enables you to do is do some really amazing work. We can now look inside the human body with incredible resolution and specificity. This is a beating heart of a patient in heart failure, actually. Here I'm going to show you now the highest resolution MRI scan ever done. This is of Mark Hodash, who curates the TED Med conference. And this is now the highest computational version of a human brain. This is Mark. And let's look inside his brain now, as we can sort of fly in now and look at levels of detail and structure and function, the different tracks in his brain at a level of specificity that was only imagined and can be done with computer resolution and speed, which would have been impossible even a couple of years ago. And now, even in real time, we can look inside the brain. fMRI, or real-time MRI, pioneered by folks like Christopher DeCharms, who's here at Omniron, allows us to look into our brain at what we're thinking. We heard about compassion a while ago. You can see areas of compassion or pain and learn to modulate this in real time. And then learn what effects different medication or different meditations play upon your brain and potentially allow us to optimize medications and treatments into the future. We're also moving into an era of molecular imaging, not just a plain CT scan, but molecules which tag certain tumors, for example, enable us to find things with higher resolution with less invasive procedures. So that's imaging. But let's get personal. Who here's had an endoscopy? Okay, well, by the time you're 50, you should all have a screening colonoscopy. There's your public service announcement. And I bet you would rather avoid the pointy end of the stick. It's now possible using computational and imaging to eventually do virtual colonoscopy, essentially to fly through your colon. And now yeah, that's what it looks like. The radiologist can now take this sort of flight simulator simulology along with artificial intelligence and be able to identify, for example, lesions which would have been missed otherwise. So combining radiology and artificial intelligence is an example of exponentials into medicine. So what we're really having here now with this new era is a paradigm shift. We're moving to a true era of digital medicine, where we're integrating biomedicine, IT, and wireless, which is going to bring on, I think, a really brave new world across the spectrum. Even my stethoscope today is digital. It hears things far better than I can, and I'm pretty sure it will start diagnosing murmurs better than I can pretty soon. And now in my hand, I can actually hold a palm-sized ultrasound device, which used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now it fits in my palm, still costs a lot of money, but gives immense power in the clinical setting. I can go up to the cloud and download information on different drugs. There's going to be a whole new realm of information-based decision-making support for clinicians to help make the right choices for the patients at the right time. And clearly, as you're probably aware, we're moving from this era of paper medicine, old charts. I mean, still only 10% of records in the United States are electronic. It's moving exponentially into the future, but we're moving from this era of big charts, thick things, hard to find information in, to an era of digital charting, digital radiology, and of course, today is the day, well, on your iPhone, you can now access potentially your electronic medical record, your personal health record, and now today is iPad launch day. I saw one outside, and I think the iPad will clearly change medicine. When I was a resident at Mass General Hospital, we just started doing online ordering. We push a big cart around, cable to the wall to order things. The future is going to be pad-based computing in medicine. So instead of visiting your doctor and visiting your chart, essentially, the future is also going to really enable the era of virtual visits and telemedicine. And this is just starting today. And it's starting to even be reimbursed by insurance companies, where you can go online, essentially have a confidential Skype-type session. And because about 80% of primary care visits don't require actually visiting your physician. A lot can be done just by seeing and talking to the patient. So that's virtual visits, and that's going to be augmented by a wide range of new technologies that augments those visits, from home health monitors to wireless home monitoring, from a scale that will talk, and blood pressure cuffs that will, through Bluetooth, talk to your physician and care provider. There are a whole slew of body computing type devices that you can just wear, wearable computing, that uploads through your phone, in most cases, your healthcare data, and that can really impact your health outcome. For compliance, you might want your neighbor who has TB to really be taking their medication. Well, there's technology now where you can embed an RFID chip inside a pill, swallow that pill, and it will actually know that you've actually taken that pill and help monitor other aspects of your health. So it's an integration of IT, devices, and the web. Now, you're probably familiar all with the Nike shoe. That's an example of, I think, the first example of being able to sort of track your exercise and wellness performance. And there's new groups springing up over here in the Bay Area, the quantified self, where people measure all sorts of things, not just how far and how fast they've run, but how much they sleep, how much they wake up. And this is going to merge with a whole slew of basically wearable small devices that you'll have in your clothes that will basically enable your wellness and healthcare to be telemetered at almost any time. And you won't even notice you're wearing it. For folks who have problems, let's say you have an elderly relative, you're worried about them falling at home, there's something that's being developed called the iShoe. It's going to be able to tell if someone has missed gait or has a fall and telemeter that information back to their children or their healthcare provider or to emergency medical services. And through these sort of home-based continual monitoring devices, we're going to have a different type of appreciation about our health, because we're going to be able to see it and touch it all the time and see trends that you wouldn't really appreciate with just spot visits into the clinic. So, and even your clinic can visit you. This is an example of a mobile robotic doctor. You want the world's best hematologist? They can come to you. Yeah. So now you might say this is all technology, great, but I think the practice of medicine, the art of medicine, is actually spending time with your patients. And my hope as a clinician is that some of these technologies will actually enable us to have more time for the important aspects of patient care, not just charting and worrying about being sued. So it's going to leverage that technology. One other really amazing field is robotic surgery. It's essentially already here today, and this is enabling surgeons to be essentially super enabled. People do things inside the body that they couldn't do ever before, even through laparoscopy. And robotic surgery, such as by companies like Intuitive Surgical in the Bay Area, are now changing the game even further. They're adding layers like augmented reality, taking some of those scans you saw earlier and putting that into the surgical field. So when the surgeon's looking through something 3D, they actually, for example, see where the tumor is inside of a liver, for example, and do the proper resection. And that field is moving very quickly. Augmented decision support. A surgeon in France can be doing a surgery with a surgeon in New York, for example, and essentially working on the same case. We're also moving to an era of scarless surgery, new procedures where essentially the robotic endoscope can come, for example, down your throat, out your stomach, and pull out your gallbladder, and you'd be home for lunch. That's a procedure called NOTES, or natural orifice transluminal endoscopic surgery, and that's coming downstream as well. So now we've talked about controlling computers or robots as a surgeon. How about just using your brain in general? There's a whole new era in neuroscience called brain-computer interface, or BCI. And it's already been possible today, for example, in a few clinical trials with quadriplegic patients, to take a small postage-sized stamp and put that on the motor cortex of a quadriplegic, and using just thought, move your arm to right, left. They can't move their arm, but they can move a cursor in 3 dimensions and control things from a wheelchair to typing to the television. And that's only going to merge with the next era of essentially bionics. Here's an example of Dean Kamen, the famed inventor of the Luke arm. This is an incredible bionic arm, which has over 17 degrees of freedom. And the ability to integrate this, again, with brain-computer interfaces or other interfaces is really going to, I think, change the era of what it means to be disabled. There are cybernetics, the fusion of machine information systems and technology to actually augment motion. I met these folks in Japan last fall. Essentially, imagine if you have weakness in a leg, or you might even be paralyzed, these sort of exoskeleton robotics are going to be essentially able to augment the patient. And it's really going to change the game, I think, particularly, for example, one of my heroes is Amy Mullins. She has over 10 pairs of different types of lower leg prosthetics, and some of them actually make her very super abled. So I think we're going to change the definition in many cases from disabled to super abled. Now, healthcare in general. Things are getting more expensive and bigger. So the trend has been obesity, but really the actual trend in medical technology is getting exponentially smaller. So let's give you a few examples of that. We can now shrink devices with into essentially, here's an eye pill, the example of a small pill with telemeter data that you can swallow. It can both diagnose particular medical problems and release certain drugs at the right place in your intestinal system. Those devices are shrinking even smaller to the point where there'll be autonomous robots essentially able to move through your colon and do microsurgery. This is being integrated as well into the laboratory setting. What you see in the upper right here is microfluidics technology at our Steve Quake's lab at Stanford. And on these single small microfluidic chips, you can take the place of dozens of laboratory personnel in a very large laboratory and do thousands of tests very quickly and even at the point of care. And this is actually going to translate much of medical technology even to the third world and facilitate a lot of great clinical work. We heard from the provost about the Fletcher lab at Berkeley with this cell phone microscope, taking very small things and being able to telemer those to labs or analysts around the world. So era of telemedicine is merging with small devices and here even the simple mobile phone. Going down the rabbit hole a little further, the ultimate vision, I think, of nanomedicine, that is the ability to build very small micro devices at the molecular level, are going to give us an immense amount of power and control in the medical world. The ability, for example, to build respirocytes, essentially artificial red blood cells that can carry multifolds more oxygen than normal red blood cells and actually can monitor your system as they move through. There are microbivores that have been designed that can potentially enhance your immune system, and small little microbots that might want to clean out your arteries if you had too many cheeseburgers. So nanomedicine, it's coming. Now, how about exponentially cheaper? That's not something usually associated with medicine, but at least it's associated with technology. Here is an advertisement from the 80s. $340 per megabyte, not megabyte, not gigabyte. So that's an example of exponential decrease in cost and performance. That's also happening in many aspects of medicine. So think about the human genome. It's only been a decade since the first human genome was essentially sequenced at the cost of multi-millions of dollars and many, many years of science and effort. And that now has dropped more than exponentially, at a double exponential rate, to the point where I won't be surprised if we show up at a TED conference in a couple of years and we're going to have basically our genome in a gift bag. And the $100 genome isn't far away, and that's going to really be a game changer in medicine. It's really going to enable the era of personalized medicine, the ability to find the right drug for the right person at the right time. So personalized healthcare in general, again, today we basically give the same drug as a one fits all. And we're going to move to the era of really picking the right drug, based not just on genetics, but on other aspects as well. And there are many companies, many in the Bay Area here, working on how to facilitate this, both from analyzing the data and collecting the data and making it useful and integrative. Now, for myself, I can already go online now through my 23andMe profile. I can see that, for example, I have, well, about a little lower risk of getting macular degeneration, kind of blindness, but through analysis through a different company with the same data, I can see that, whoa, I have actually almost twice the lifetime risk of getting type 2 diabetes. So that might actually change my behavior and how I eat. This kind of information is very powerful when you can put your hands on it. There's a new field of epigenetics, the ability to actually not understand what your DNA is, but what genes are turned on. So if you have a caterpillar and a butterfly, they have the same genes, but the ones that are turned on are quite different. And learning what those are in the human system is going to be quite important. So clearly, it's beyond genome, it's beyond behavior. There are many other aspects that affect our health and are starting to be appreciated. One of those is actually where we've lived. Have you ever filled out a medical form that has asked you, where have you lived? Well, actually, it's quite important. That's the field of geomedicine. So, for example, if you grew up in Long Beach, on the right side of the map, you might have a very different outcome if you lived by these toxic waste dumps on the left side of the map. Where you've lived, which can now be tracked by our cell phones, is going to impact that. So, we have genomics now, proteomic data. The data from a single drop of blood in your finger can give you tens of thousands of pieces of information. The environmental data, what toxins you're exposed to, clinical imagery, biomarkers. How do we start to make sense of all this? Well, David Ewan Duncan, who is going to speak later today, wrote an amazing book, Experimental Man, where he had almost all these tests done. The challenge is what to do with that, and that's being enabled by a new field called systems biology, led by Lee Hood at the Systems Biology Institute in Seattle. They're starting to take this information and start to integrate it, and I challenge many of you students here to start looking at this field. So what we're going to be able to do is take a drop of blood, analyze tens of thousands of proteins as a molecular fingerprint, and start to see when things start to go awry. If you see one little molecule off, it may need you're heading for trouble, and you can head that off. Which brings up what can lead from this is the true era of what's called P4 medicine by Lee Hood. Predictive, you're going to know what diseases you have predilection to. You'll be able to take P, prevention. It'll become personalized. You'll take the right therapy for you when you need it. And more so, it's going to become participatory, meaning that you can start sharing this data with others. And that's a big frame shift, this Health 2.0 movement, we're connecting our health data to others. There's multiple websites from Cure Together, Patients Like Me, and others. We're starting to share our health information and help others leverage and understand what individual patients have gone through. You can now wear small devices, for example, measuring how far you've walked, or imagine your scale tweeting your weight to your friends every day. I mean, that might affect your behavior if you know your scale is going to tweet your weight to everybody. And that's bringing this era, I think, of integrative decisions. And Thomas Goetz, who spoke at TEDx Silicon Valley, has just written a great book called The Decision Tree. We're starting to understand and touch our data in different ways, and that's really going to make us more engaged, mindful of it, and it's really going to start affecting our health as we actually can see what we're tweeting as we go. So what about exponentially better? So I work in the cancer field. We know that unfortunately many patients relapse, and most of the chemotherapy we give today is big guns chemotherapy. It's not very specific, and it has a lot of toxicities. There's a new field that's been pioneered at Stanford and others in terms of cancer stem cells. If you think of a tumor like a weed in the garden, we often hit it with radiation chemotherapy. The top of the weed goes away, but we leave the roots remaining. And we're learning in multiple diseases to identify what is actually the cancer stem cell. Because today we're often going after the wrong target. We can kind of melt the big tumor, but months or sometimes even years later, the disease relapses because the tumor stem cell was still there. We're learning to identify now the actual stem cell targets, the cancer stem cell, and knock those out as we go. And that's going to lead to a frame shift in medicine. And this is just an example of new technology just in the clinic now, using these antibodies against tumors along with chemotherapy. So I'll finish up by talking about personalized oncology. Now that we can have more targeted drugs, the question is who should actually have those drugs? The future of, I think, oncology is to be able to take a tissue sample, do some of that deep dive analysis I talked about, the genome, the proteome, all those other things that are going to be expressed, understand what they mean and the pathways, and be able to personalize the therapy and understand what is exactly best for that exact patient's lung cancer or colon cancer, as opposed to sort of giving them what everybody else is getting. And that's going to be a game changer in medicine. Now, I'll finish by the exponential of my focus field of regenerative medicine. And this is clearly going to be, I think, a game changer in the future. And I'll define regenerative medicine as the ability to repair, replace, and regenerate tissues that have been aged, diseased, or damaged. And there's been a lot of excitement, clearly, about embryonic stem cells because they have the ability to turn into almost any tissue type. However, they have yet to enter clinical trials. We do have, however, in our own bodies, multiple sources of adult stem cells, from those in our neurons, there's cardiac stem cells, bone marrow-derived stem cells. Those are actually the cells we use in the field of, my clinical field of bone marrow transplantation, a form of stem cell transplantation we've been doing for over 40 years. Now, we're also learning to use these adult stem cells in other realms today to treat heart disease, vascular disease. They're used as an orthobiologic in orthopedics, and potentially can even treat neurodegenerative diseases. But where do you get these cells? Well, we have a few options. One, you can go into the bone marrow and take out those bone marrow stem cells. You can get them out of fat and liposuction, so get a trim and bank your cells from cord blood if you haven't already been born. And one little innovation that I came up with, I was spending a lot of time as a fellow at Stanford harvesting bone marrow. We take a big needle, you poke it in the hip about 200 times, hurts the patient, hurts my arm, and I thought there might be a better way to do this, so briefly I'll just describe a little device we came up called the marrow miner. And that's enabled us to actually enter the marrow in a much more less invasive way. This is sort of how it works. We, under local anesthesia, can simply get into the marrow cavity, aspirate marrow, and have this small flexible flex shaft move through the marrow cavity and aspirate marrow as you go and do a very rich bone marrow harvest very quickly. And that's now, as I'll try and finish up, moving into the clinic and gets more stem cells out more quickly. And this is just an example of this device in action in a live patient. You can see it following the curve of the hip bone there. So if you ever want to bank your marrow cells or use them for bone marrow transplant or regenerative medicine, this may be one application. It's hopefully going to be in the commercial zone soon. So in closing, the future of regenerative medicine is to truly individualize therapy. We talked about the cells in your nose, for example, the same DNA that you had when you were an embryo. The trick is turning on the stem cell program, and the new era of induced pluripotent stem cells is enabling that potential future. We can actually reprogram a skin cell to act like an embryonic stem cell, which can then turn into any of the over 200 tissue types in your body. And this is only just starting to extrapolate over the last couple of years, but I believe pretty soon you're going to be able to give a sample of a skin cell, make your own induced pluripotent stem cells, and potentially even make cardiac tissue, heart cells, insulin-producing cells that you can use in the future if you need them, even freeze those away as patient-specific banking. And where this is going to integrate, and I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to skip this a little bit, is tissue engineering, integrating these cells with different devices and constructs so that we can actually build, for example, a heart from scratch. And the true integration of exponential technologies, I think, is integrated here with the concept of 3D organ printing, taking your own personalized cells, potentially selecting different versions of those and using them as an inkjet printer, for example. Different cells, that's the actual cell ink, can be printed in a three-dimensional construct, for this example, to eventually build an organ. Today, we can basically build blood vessels. So, I think the future of medicine is exciting. I think we're going to have the ability to empower the patient more, enable the clinician, enhance wellness, and really essentially cure the well before they get sick. And when people do get sick, the therapies will be much more specific and even personalized, cell-based specific. And we all know that in medicine, we want to detect things early. Stage 1, we pick it up early, we can cure 90%. Unfortunately, we're often detecting disease late. Stage 4, very low survival. I think the future of health and medicine is to move to the era of stage 0 medicine. And as a bone marrow transplant physician, I'm looking forward to being out of a job. Thanks a lot.